Following is a multimedia presentation that is a supplement to the Sustainable Country Living book. Chapter 2, The End of Life as We Know It. In the early 2000s, National Geographic Channel had a long-running series called Doomsday Preppers. This reality show was broken up into 3 parts in each episode, including visiting 3 different people or families that were preparing for some form of disaster that they were fearing. There were a wide variety of fears that these people had, including economic collapse, massive earthquakes, rising ocean levels, super tsunami, catastrophic weather, global pandemic, polar shift, sudden climate change, solar flares, supervolcano, hyperinflation, catastrophic oil crisis, an EMP detonation, power grid going down, terrorist attacks, nuclear accident or war, civil unrest, martial law, the apocalypse, and the end of the world. We find in the book Country Living these counsels. The work of the people of God is to prepare for the events of the future, which will come upon them in blinding force. Country Living, page 10. We must be preparing for these issues. Country Living, page 11. The initial and primary way to physically prepare for these things that are coming is moving out of the city into the country.
What made us leave the city for a simpler life? Well, I think it all started at about 2008 when the economy, the housing bubble started to really implode. We really became aware of how precarious our situation it was, how we had been relying upon the grocery stores for our pantry, and just it really opened our eyes. Coupled with all of the things going on after 9/11 and the erosion of our liberties, civil or liberties and freedoms in this country, the combination of those two things really made us want to make a change. So we started looking for property, found a nice place out up in the mountains, very secluded, a couple hours out of any major cities, and started our homestead. It was a difficult decision for us to make such a drastic move. We had a very comfortable life, 2 6-figure incomes, and traveled and did pretty much whatever we wanted. So giving that all up for my wife to become a full-time stay-at-home mom and homeschooler, and me to be trying to provide an income on the homestead was a drastic change for us. Another one of the key components in our move was I found it difficult as a Christian to have a direct connection with God in the city. With all the distractions, the media, everywhere you looked around you saw the creations of man. Everything seems to be so noisy and screaming for your attention. What we sought as a family in a more peaceful wilderness setting was to be able to have a quieter, simpler life, to slow things down a little bit, to not just to be going and pressing all the time. And this has really helped our spiritual connection and help us to walk closer with God. How important is strategic location for your homestead? Well, it's very important on so many matters. What's going to happen? What can we expect to happen in the future? Is the country going to come under nuclear attack? An EMP attack? Is it going to be is there going to be a slow coup or a soft coup, takeover of our government, and the continual loss of our rights? Who knows what's going to come? So trying to find a homestead that is a good defense for all those things, or potential things, natural disasters, you can throw that in, is very important.
Of this list of disasters and fears, we will look at some of the major ones. The first one is earthquakes and tsunami dangers.
The first warning of a monster earthquake off America's coast, the worst natural disaster in the history of the nation, is coming, say the scientists. And they are all in agreement. It is absolutely coming. Thousands of dogs will bark at alert before the ground liquefies in one area. And a wall of water will slam into the Pacific Northwest, up to 100 feet high and up to 700 feet across. More than 10,000 will die. It is coming. It is a certainty. The question is when. The warning is from the New Yorker magazine. We'll give you all the details from the scientists and find out why it's already all overdue. The big one in the Pacific Northwest, an area I'd never even heard of as far as seismic activity goes. Hang on, this is interesting. Read a stunning article by Catherine Schulz in the New Yorker this week. And frankly, if I lived right now in the Pacific Northwest, I'd be considering moving. Seriously. The gist of it is this. The federal government estimates 13,000 Americans will die in a major earthquake and tsunami in the Pacific Northwest. It's not a question of whether, but when. This earthquake is coming, and it's overdue. Consider that the magnitude 9.0 earthquake in Japan, just a few years ago, remember that? Killed more than 15,000 people in the north of Japan and injured thousands of others. Seismologists say that the quake that will strike on our Pacific Northwest coastline should be even stronger, at up to a 9.2. They call such a quake a margin rupture quake, and it's every bit as bad as it sounds. Here's the reason for it. Our entire continent sits on the North American tectonic shelf, right? Plate, I should say. Off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, from the top of Washington State all the way down to northern California. This is it. And another plate called the Juan de Fuca is trying to slide up under North America, but it's stuck. We have an illustration over here in the big wall. Let me show you what this is. This is our continent here. This is the Cascada Mountains. This is the Cascadia, what do they call it? The Cascadia what? Bridge. The Cascadia Bridge. I was actually asking him, but thank you. The North American plate here and the Juan de Fuca plate here. This one's sliding up under, and eventually this is going to go down, send a huge wall of water up. That wall will go all the way over to Japan, and the other will come onto our shore within 15 minutes. And when it slips, it will unleash not only a colossal earthquake, but also that tsunami. 700 miles long, and in some places up to a 100-foot high wall of water and whatever it's pushing, like houses and dump trucks and schools. Thousands and thousands will not escape. The New Yorker quotes a FEMA official who says, and I quote, "Our operating assumption is that everything west of Interstate 5 will be toast." Everything west of Interstate 5 is gone. That's Seattle, Tacoma, Portland and Olympia, Salem and Eugene, wiped out. Altogether about 7 million people. That's not including tourists. So think of summertime. The New Yorker reports that FEMA calculations indicate the disaster will damage or destroy about 1 million buildings, including 3,000 schools and 1/3 of all fire stations. And perhaps the worst part of all of this, these sorts of earthquakes happen at regular intervals in exactly this part of the world, have forever. On average, according to seismologists, about every 240 years. So when was the last one of these massive 9.2 or so earthquakes? Well, the last one was more than 300 years ago, the year 1700. It struck in the Pacific Northwest and sent a 600-foot wave of water all the way to Japan. So right now, on average, the Pacific Northwest is decades overdue for the really, really big one. Michio Kaku is a physicist and professor at City College of New York. This article is stunning. Is it overstated in any way?
No, the Cascadia Fault is an earthquake waiting to happen. We know it's going to happen with an energy 30 times the maximum energy of the San Andreas Fault. So Hollywood has us brainwashed into thinking the big one is going to be in California. No, the Cascadia Fault would pack energy 30 times the energy that the San Andreas Fault can muster.
The article speaks of a liquefaction of the Earth, that part of the Earth will turn to liquid.
That's right. We're talking about major energy surges inside the ground that'll cause it to liquefy. We've seen that in Japan. We saw that at Fukushima, and it's almost like quicksand. One day you're walking on solid ground, the next you're falling right into a quicksand.
This earthquake would last 4 minutes or more, the rattling and the shaking, and then within 15 minutes they estimate this wall of water. In the entire inundation zone, you could have water up to 100 feet high.
That's right. And in the inundation zone, we have 70,000 people that have almost no clue as to what could happen. You know, in Japan, you have to live with earthquakes every day. Children go through tests and drills. People are conscious of this. But in the Pacific Northwest, it barely rates on the radar screen.
There's something that happens before the shaking that we can sense, sensors can pick up. That's an early warning system that they have all over Japan, especially in the north and in the Tokyo area. They've been trying to get it push through, look for money for it in the Seattle-Tacoma area, nothing.
That's right. Before the earthquake actually hits, there's a compression wave that is detected by animals, for example. Animals start to act very strange, and we've seen that happen before earthquakes. And then a minute, 2 minutes later, boom, you head for the hills because there's nothing left to do except to go to high ground.
You mentioned what this sort of event has caused in history.
That's right. In the year 1700, there was a massive earthquake and tsunami which surged over Japan. And then running the videotape backwards, you can actually see that in 1700, it originated with a Cascadia fault. And then we physicists can calculate the energy, the magnitude, the dynamics once we got these two events linked together. And that was only done in the last decade or so.
And you mentioned Mount Everest.
That's right. Mount Everest is also created by the collision of two faults, just like what we have here. The one fault going under, the other fault going over, and that created the Himalayan mountains. That created Mount Everest. That's the power packed by the subduction zone earthquake.
Okay. Averages of when things are going to happen are really not very reliable. I think they use by example, the difference between 4 and 6 is 2. I forget exactly how they did it. We can't be sure exactly when this is going to happen, but we're positive it's going to happen. If you lived in the Pacific Northwest, you had little kids, would you live there?
I'd think twice. I would have to drill them, just like what they do in Japan, be part of their life in terms of having an emergency kit, where to go in case of an emergency, what to do, what frequencies to go to, and so on and so forth. And by the way, we know that this is going to happen because by simply drilling into the seafloor, we can see evidence of ancient tsunamis going back 10,000 years. And we've
There have
known
been how many over that period?
41, which means that the time between the cycles is about 240 years.
Wow.
And it's been 315 years since the last big one. Now, of course, this is not rigorous, it's not absolute. But according to this figure, we could be overdue for another big one.
Yeah, by many decades. It's nice to talk to you. Thank you. Really weird and scary.
That's right. And, you know, within the lifetime of some of our viewers, they may see Seattle and Portland destroyed.
Then there's a solar flare. A solar flare is a phenomena on the surface of the sun. It shoots flames from this ball of fire. The risks of a solar flare are very little warning. It takes 8 minutes to travel to the Earth from the sun. It can damage satellites, knock out radio communication, but isn't very dangerous on Earth. We do have some biblical and spirit of prophecy counsel about fire coming down from heaven. Genesis 19:21 says, "Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens." So here we see the fire was coming out of the sky. Luke 17:28-30 says, "Likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so it will be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed." Last Day Events, page 24, says, "Great balls of fire were falling from upon houses, and from these balls fiery arrows were flying in every direction. It was impossible to check the fires that were kindled, and many places were being destroyed. The terror of the people was indescribable." So here we see Ellen White seeing in vision a future event where there's going to be fire coming down from heaven. Another major fear that people have is coronal mass ejection. Coronal mass ejection, shortened to be CME, is a geomagnetic storm. NASA has this animation to show you what it would look like. What is the risk of a CME? There is advanced warning, 18 hours to 5 days to get to Earth. Can take out the power grids and electronics are not damaged. I was doing this portion of the seminar at a camp meeting one time, and somebody had just purchased from the used book sale this book and brought it to my attention. It's quite interesting when you think about the solar storms. This was written by J.N. Loughborough in 1892. It's called The Rise and Progress of Seventh-day Adventists. And if you look at this particular page, they have an illustration in there of what phenomena happened in the sky. It was titled Strange Appearance of the Sun. December 1843 and September 1844. Each of these lasted for 2 hours. It says, of these, our space will permit only the representation of the following appearances of the sun in Newich, England, in December 1843, and similar one occurred in New Haven, September 9, 1844, for 2 hours before and after noon, and was witnessed by thousands of people. Another phenomena that people fear is weather changes. We hear a lot about climate change or global warming. This is a video clip put out by the Catholic Online about this problem and how the Pope is pushing an agenda to try to prevent this.
Spesso siamo tentati di pensare che il creato sia una nostra proprietà.
We have various spirit of prophecy statements that can add light to this topic of the change of the weather. Book 2, Selected Messages, page 62 says, and see the storms and tempests. Satan is working in the atmosphere. He is poisoning the atmosphere. Testimonies to Ministers, 455. A day of fire and storm is about to burst on our world. Great Controversy, 589. In accidents by sea and land, in great conflagrations, in fierce tornadoes and hailstorms, in tempests, floods, cyclones, tidal waves, and earthquakes in thousands of forms. Satan is exercising his power. He sweeps away the ripening harvest, and famine and distress follow. He imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish. So another issue here is global pandemic, which we've all experienced recently. Councils on Health, page 168, states, sickness, suffering, and death are the work of an antagonistic power. Satan is the destroyer. Another thing is a relation to the pandemic. Pandemic was a wake-up call for us on many levels.
2020 has been a wake-up call for many Americans, showing how things can quickly take a turn for the worse. We experienced prosperity and calm for quite some time before this year, but we've quickly seen how that can change. One disaster or perceived calamity can cause panic. More than one catastrophe at the same time could lead to a prolonged grid down situation. While the region might recover after a few days or weeks, a national incident could leave you on your own with no help coming. If a significant enough event were to occur that completely disrupted our supply chains and resources, the results would be catastrophic.
We have a lesson to learn from the pandemic.
By the way, before COVID, did you ever think that you and I were going to go through an epidemic or pandemic where we're going to be told that, we're going to shut down everything, you're going to be working from home, you better quarantine, put the mask on, have gloves on, when you're going out there, don't touch this, don't do that, kids stay home. Did you think that, did that thought even cross your mind? When 2019 was going into 2020 and you're preparing in December, did you say, honey, we better be ready for a potential pandemic to happen? We did not think about it, and then all of a sudden, boom, we were hit with it, right? So one thing no one's talking about that is very likely that could happen, a power outage. So imagine power outage happens. No light, no fridge, food is no longer good, no phone charger, phone is done, no internet. What happens to your life?
So when we think about our dependence on power and how things have changed, this illustration shows a water pump windmill like an old farm would have, and the big wind generators making electricity. How things have changed in 100 years. We are very, very dependent on electricity. If there was a power grid failure, we would be set back, some say 500 years.
As disconcerting as bioterrorism and the pandemic threat is, one factor has contributed more to the utterly dependent state of this nation than any other: electricity.
If you just think today about the world we live in and all of the creature comforts we have, you will recognize that essentially none of them would be there without electricity. It is the power source for almost everything out there. You can't communicate. If the electrons don't flow in your car, the gasoline won't explode in the cylinders and you won't go down the road. So if you cut off the flow of electrons in our world today, it's just a whole different world. And the grid upon which we depend for almost everything is very vulnerable. It is just at the tipping point is the way that the experts will characterize it. Our demand has grown, and the grid has grown just barely enough to keep up with demand. And it is really almost a Rube Goldberg kind of thing. And the least little perturbation can bring parts of the grid tumbling down, as happened in Florida not very long ago. The great Northeast blackout of several years ago. A tree limb fell on a wire out in Ohio and caused a great blackout half a dozen years or so ago. Any little thing can bring down large parts of the grid. It is very vulnerable to terrorists. I am told that there are a dozen substations in the country that are so critical to the function of the grid that if terrorists took out those dozen substations, the grid would come down. And could have events in the future where the power grid will go down and it's not in any reasonable time coming back on. For instance, if when the power grid went down, some of our large transformers were destroyed, damaged beyond use. We don't make any of those in this country. They're made overseas, and you order one, and 18 months to 2 years later, they will deliver it. Our power grid is very vulnerable. It is very much on the edge. Our military knows that. And sometimes it's very difficult to do what they call a black start. That is, to start without electricity. Many of the things that produce electricity need electricity to start them spinning. If you don't have electricity, how do you do that? They call it a black start. And many of our big power producing turbines and so forth cannot do a black start. They've got to have electricity from somewhere else to charge them and get them spinning so that they can then start making electricity. If you go do a Google search and go on the web, this isn't some strange knowledge that the Congress has and nobody else has. It's out there. This is pretty widely known that our grid is very vulnerable. And if you just think about all the things that are important in your life, how many of them wouldn't be there if the grid has gone down? You can get some measure as to what the world is going to be like, what your country is going to be like, what your community is going to be like if we don't have power.
Then there's not only the vulnerability, but there's the possibility of physical attacks on the power grid.
Former Federal Energy Regulatory Chairman John Wellinghoff said that last April's sniper attack on a power station near San Jose, California, was an act of domestic terrorism. The little-known attack occurred before 1 a.m. on April 16th of last year. A group of attackers cut telecommunications cables in an underground vault near Highway 101. The assailants then approached the Metcalf transmission substation. After sending out a signal by flashlight, they fired AK-47s at its transformers. More than 100 shell casings were later found at the site. They seem to have targeted the transformers' oil-filled cooling systems, which began leaking oil after numerous gunshots. The transformers did not explode, and the attackers fled the scene after waving the flashlight again. Wellinghoff said he was going public because he was concerned about national security and worried that larger-scale attacks on electric grid sites are now in the works.
A cyber attack targeting America's electricity grid could be catastrophic, plunging most of North America into blackout, potentially for months. Veteran journalist Ted Koppel investigates just such a possible disaster in his new book. It's called Lights Out: A Cyber Attack, A Nation Unprepared, Surviving the Aftermath. And Ted Koppel joins us now from Washington, D.C. To put us all in the right mood for this conversation, let's take a look at a clip. This is from the 2013 National Geographic film called American Blackout. Let's roll it, please, Sheldon.
What the hell is going on? Reports are coming in of a massive grid failure that has taken power out along the east coast of the United States.
So far, we have no confirmation on what is causing this devastating outage, but rumors of a cyber attack are already being mentioned by authorities.
Ted, we remember well back in 2003 that about 10 million people here in the province of Ontario and 45 million Americans in the Northeast lost power because of that situation. Can you tell us the difference between what happened then and what you're writing about in your book?
Yes, what happened then was a natural event. Apparently some power lines were brushed by tree branches, and incredible as it seems, that caused a cascading outage, which, as you say, resulted in millions of people, not only in the United States, the northeastern U.S., but also in Canada, to be without power, as I recall, for about 3 days. I think 7 or 8 people died. It cost billions in lost revenue and expenses to both governments. And then the United States and Canada formed a joint commission to figure out what had happened. And interestingly enough, one of the things, and remember now, this was 13 years ago, one of the things that they concluded was that the power grid would be susceptible to a cyber attack.
Russia can take down the grid. On March 15, 2018, the Department of Homeland Security, together with the FBI, announced that Russian government hackers infiltrated critical infrastructures in the United States, including energy, nuclear, commercial facilities, water, aviation, and critical manufacturing sectors. The Department of Homeland Security FBI Joint Technical Alert said, according to the DHS FBI report, malicious Russian activities have been ongoing since at least March 2016. The Russian malware, which has been sitting in the control systems of various U.S. utilities, allows the Russians to turn off power and sabotage the energy grids. So you can see from this official report that it's believed that the Russians already have malware embedded in the controls of the power grid and other infrastructures. And with just sending it a message to do it, it can shut the portions of the grid down. One of the very common fears of people concerned about the future is the man-made event called an electromagnetic pulse.
Everything that you know today will change. I'm prepping for an HEMP. An HEMP is a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse. It's basically an atomic bomb detonated high above the Earth's surface. Launching an HEMP against the United States, it's an easy way to fight. Knock out our grid, destroy our infrastructure and civilization as we know it. In 1 nanosecond, we will be without any electronics. Vehicles stop running. I could just picture planes falling from the sky. A month after an HEMP event, that statistics say that 70 to possibly 85% of the population would be dead. It's going to be a nightmare.
We're very dependent on electricity. All our conveniences, appliances, computers, all communication, phone and internet, all modern transportation, like fuel pumps for gas, all water supply, municipal or a well, all food supply, transportation would stop, all purchases, cash registers wouldn't work, all lighting, city and a county. If you lived in the city or suburbs, there would no longer be any power. Which of these basic needs would you still have available? If you lived in the country and there was no longer any power, which of these basic needs would you still have available? It's important to understand that actual surviving requires 3 things: air, water, and food. Typically, it's understood that air is needed within 4 minutes or you die. If you don't have water for 4 days, you'll die. And if you don't have food for 4 weeks, you will die. And then there's the growing fear of a nuclear attack. Of course, this fear was strong during the Cold War era, particularly Cuban Missile Crisis. But there's renewed concern with nuclear attacks, with Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China all being potential enemies that could use nuclear, let alone some rogue nation. So there's a growing interest in people having bunkers. Here's a video clip of Doomsday City.
We met up with Tom Dundas and his neighbor Mark at a gas station in the middle of rural South Dakota, and we followed them on a long drive through the country to Vivos X Point, a community that feels like it's at the end of the earth, and that's by design. We go through several security gates of the old Army base, and then you spot all the mounds in the ground. Bombs used to be stored in these bunkers during World War II. Now people live here. I was looking at the brochure. It says nuclear, pandemic, terrorism, asteroid, supervolcano, tsunami, solar flare. I mean, there's a lot of things out there
that you could be worried about. I think the biggest thing is you go to big towns and the amount of crime and everything that goes on, you're really not safe anymore. The amount of population that's out there, I think, is a big deterrent for a lot of people.
They don't really like the name preppers out here, or doomsday, but they're getting ready in case something really, really bad happens. The community is built to be totally self-sufficient. There's 533 of these bunkers out here, and I'm told about 200 have sold so far. Sales have been picking up. They're selling about 6 or 7 every single month. The cost is $55,000. That's just for the bunker. Then you have to build out the inside. And it's a massive area out here, about 7,000 acres.
We have a lot of ex-military. We have an awful lot of ex-law enforcement. We've got people that are teachers, that are telecommuters. There's people that, you have to have Starlink out here. It's the only internet you have, but it works very, very well. So people live out here and they telecommute and do their jobs right out of their bunkers. So some people are interested in moving up here. Other people are interested in having a place to bug out to, if that's what they want.
So this is one of these bunkers that's been built out. It's a little loud outside because they've got the generator going, but these bomb-blasted doors are on the front, which are really heavy and kind of difficult to open. And once you've got that open, you come inside. There's another very, very secure door. The electrical room is right here. There's some storage on the other side. You'd never know, but the inside is actually quite nice. Almost kind of feels like a fancy college apartment or something like that. There's no light that comes in from the outside, really, so that part might feel a little claustrophobic, but it's actually quite open and airy.
These are a few of the rooms.
There's several bedrooms, bathrooms, a media room, extra fuel, and a gun safe.
This actually is set up with a blast valve, so if there's a blast outside, it would equalize. That's part of that system that's up there. That's the blast valves on top.
California businessman Robert Vicino bought the old Army base in 2016, and he's been selling the bunkers ever since. He says people will have to take matters into their own hands during a doomsday event. Crime and overpopulation they're most worried about. Since COVID and the wars in Ukraine and Israel, the bunkers are in even higher demand.
And what happens after some major event? The first few days are critical.
Any disaster on a national or global scale can quickly turn neighbor against neighbor. The calm social order you enjoy will be flipped on its head just after a few days. The sad reality is that most people aren't prepared to survive to next week if supplies were cut off, let alone for 90 days or more. There is, however, a timeline that generally follows disasters. Knowing this timeline can put you one step ahead of the herd and keep you safer amidst the chaos. The first 3 days. Depending on the national disaster, the first 24 hours can be relatively calm. If you're in the aftermath of a storm or an earthquake, this is a period where people are emerging from what is left of their shelters and making sure they are unscathed. If it's a disaster like a national power outage, most people are still relatively calm. We put a great deal of faith in our government, public services, guard, and military to restore our world following a disaster. This period of calm can last for about 2 days. After that, things begin to reveal how broken they really are. Stores that cannot process credit and debit transactions cannot sell to people without cash, and banks that cannot process deposits and withdrawals stop functioning. Just-in-time delivery services that replenish grocery and pharmacy inventories can't do so, and shortages of some items begin to occur. This fuels even more panic buying, which further exacerbates the problem. After 72 hours, people will begin to realize that help is not coming and systems will not be restored. The stress level of the community will start to boil over. If stores haven't been looted yet, it will surely begin by the 3rd day, as those who fail to prepare will desperately try to grab up the resources they now realize they need. The first week. Within the first week, supplies will be gone, either purchased or stolen. Medicines will begin to run out, and people with medicine-dependent lives will turn to hospitals for what they need. Hospitals may not be able to admit and help many people if their power cannot be restored. Police, medical, and fire services will be overwhelmed, and you cannot rely upon them. The declaration of martial law is very likely as governments attempt to keep the peace. As we saw this year, people will likely not accept martial law. Vigilante security groups will probably spring up in neighborhoods and communities. Clean water may cease to flow, and trash and human waste will begin to pile up. As sewage plants fill, municipal water supplies or local rivers may become contaminated. Natural gas and electricity will cease to flow. By the end of the first week, the levels of circulating cash will be very low, and bartered items like food, water, and durable goods will begin to rise in value. People will be either trying to leave populated areas or, for those stranded away from home when the disaster struck, they will just be arriving back to their city home, if they decide to return home, to find that the landscape has changed considerably. Third week. By the end of the 3rd week, seeing a car on the road or a plane in the sky will be a curiosity. If it's a car on the road, it likely will signify potential danger. Are there still no communication or signs of recovery? You'll be stuck where you are, and you should give up the prospect of any recovery at a national level.
But we as Christians know that there is going to come a time when there will be trouble on the earth, and ultimately we'll not be able to buy or sell if we're faithful to God. So even though there are these natural and man-made potential disasters that could change our life as we know it, we do know that the Bible predicts that there will be a time when, if we're faithful, we're going to be persecuted and we're going to not be able to buy or sell. Here is a chart that's available on the website preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. And if you watch the first presentation that I did, part number 1 of the videos, you will notice that the very first presentation was lessons learned from the 2 times of trouble I have since grown to understand more deeply the sequence of things during what we call the time of trouble. And it's not 2, but it's 3. We will go into this more deeply in another lesson, but here's the chart so that you can understand that during the little time of trouble is when we're primarily talking about being prepared. Sustainable country living is about positioning yourself so that you will be able to have backup plans for the things that you depend on, that you buy now, so that when the little time of trouble comes and it increasingly gets more difficult to buy or sell, that you'll have a way to be sustainable through these difficult times. Daniel 12:1 says, "And at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one who's found written in the book." So when we look at this chart, this time of trouble is when the plagues are poured out. It starts with the great time of trouble and commences with Jacob's time of trouble. And we will talk about the difference of those at some point. But for now, the thing to understand is once probation closes, Michael stands up, it's no longer possible to choose God or not. Everyone on earth will have made their final decision. And after that happens, then buying and selling won't be an issue at all, because the little time of trouble is over. And now the plagues have started falling, the 7 last plagues. And eventually there's a death decree that is enforced at the end of the great time of trouble, beginning of Jacob's time of trouble. At that point, the saints flee to the mountains. Their bread and water are sure, as the Bible says. There's no more saving of souls. God sustains his saints until the deliverance of the saints at the second coming. So what we're talking about is the little time of trouble and the mark of the beast. Last Day Events, page 144, says, "A great crisis awaits the people of God. Very soon our nation will attempt to enforce upon all the observance of the first day of the week as a sacred day. In doing this, they will not scruple to compel men against the voice of their own conscience to observe the day the nation declares to be the Sabbath." 146 continues, "Those who honor the Bible Sabbath will be denounced as enemies of law and order, as breaking down the moral restraints of society, causing anarchy and corruption, and calling down the judgments of God upon the earth." So they will, as this little time of trouble progresses and the world gets worse and worse, natural disasters and all of that Satan's bringing on, the wicked people will blame the faithful for these phenomena and saying it's our fault and these judgments are coming from God. Last Day Events 148, "In the last great conflict in the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. Because they refuse to break the law in obedience to earthly powers, they will be forbidden to buy and sell." Again, this is the little time of trouble. This is when we would do well to be in the country and be self-sustaining. Revelation 13, 16, and 17 says, "He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or in their forehead, and that no one may buy or sell except those who have the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name." Again, when we look at this chart, we're talking about the little time of trouble when the mark of the beast happens, when there's no buying and selling. So the focus of this course and the book is looking at what can we do to be better positioned to be able to be self-sustaining during the little time of trouble. Because if we're not, we're going to be spending so much of our time trying to survive, we won't have the time to be able to be helping other people and witnessing, because it's these other people's last chance to choose God. So it's important from our own safety to be able to be prepared, to be able to withstand a time when we won't be able to buy or sell. And it's also important for those that we come in contact with during that time to be able to help them, not only sharing what we have been given physically, but also spiritually, so that they can make the right choice for eternity. So when we analyze our own personal preparedness for when we will not be able to buy or sell, how are we positioned? It will be the goal of this course and this book to analyze the different things that I call grids, much like the power grid is one, but we have food grid and medical grid and financial grid and et cetera, et cetera. We're going to look at each of the things that you pull your wallet out for, that you spend money on to buy services or products, and say, if you don't have that option, what are you going to do? So the goal is to, by analyzing our own situations, to have a backup plan, have a plan B in the background, so that when times get tough, whether it's a natural disaster or a man-made event or the little time of trouble, that we will be positioned to be able to weather the storm more productively. So we need an explanation of how to plan for emergency backup systems for our basic needs during troubled times, how to be sustainable and independent of the public services that now we depend on. Again, Country Living, page 10, the work of the people of God are to prepare for the events of the future, which will soon come upon them with blinding force. Every time I read this, the blinding force jumps out at me. This thing is going to happen so quickly and so unexpected. It's going to be amazing. Country Living 11, we must be preparing for these issues. So, preparing for the little time of trouble right now, would you be able to survive if you could not buy or sell anything? What would you need to do to have a backup for each of these items you now purchase? To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.